Dear Mrs. Vice President, dear Deputy Governors, dear Vice Governor, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you at the panel discussion of the European section of the Hungarian Economic Association. My name is Gábor Iván. I am the President of the European Union section of the association. I will be the moderator of our discussion. Our debate will be about the monetary choices in Central Europe, addressing the issue of introduction of the euro today, tomorrow, or maybe after tomorrow. This panel is our contribution to the annual itinerant conference of the Hungarian Association. It is recorded in advance, and it will be available as from the start of the conference on the 23rd of September. Dear colleagues, Bulgaria and Croatia announced in July 2018 and July 2019 respectively, they will to join the exchange rate mechanism, the ERM2, as a pre-runner of introducing the euro. All of the ERM2 parties decided the entry into the ERM2 of Bulgaria and Croatia in July 2020. As we are at the half-time of the obligatory minimum 2 years to spend in the ERM2, we see a good opportunity to discuss the advantages and possible risks of the introduction of the euro in Central Europe, how and when to take the decision about joining the Eurozone. Our invitees are the Vice President, the Deputy or Vice Governors of the National Banks of the Czech Republic, Croatia, Hungary, Poland, and Slovakia. 2 EU member states with clear commitments towards the euro, and 3 member states with derogation, not having yet announced their plans when to introduce the common currency. Initially, we planned the participation of Bulgaria too, but a last-minute illness prevented Deputy Governor Mr. Christov from joining us. May I take this opportunity to wish a quick recovery and all the best to the Deputy Governor. Ladies and gentlemen, now let me introduce the members of the panel, our distinguished guests, for whom I'm very grateful for joining us. Let's start with Poland, with Madam Marta Kightley from Warsaw. Madam Marta Kightley is the Vice President and the first Deputy President of the National Bank of Poland. Madam Kightley is a professor at the Department of Political Economy, Law and Economic Policy of the Warsaw School of Economics. Between 2007 and 2010, she was a member of the Diplomatic Service of Poland. She headed the Political and Economic Department of the Polish Embassy in the Republic of Korea. Madam Kightley is a long-time member of the Education Council of the National Bank of Poland and of the selection jury for the best Polish economic journalist. In February 2020, the President of the Republic of Poland appointed Madam Marta Kightley as member of the Management Board of the National Bank of Poland as a Vice President of the bank. Our next guest is Mr. Marek Mora from Prague. Mr. Marek Mora is the Deputy Governor of the Czech National Bank. At the beginning of his career, Mr. Mora worked briefly in the Czech private sector. In 2003, he joined the European Commission. He joined the Directorate General for Economic and Financial Affairs. And 3 years later, he started to work for the Czech Public Administration. He was Deputy Minister of Education and then spent 2.5 years at the government office, first as a deputy to the Deputy Prime Minister, and later as Minister for European Affairs, and then briefly as an advisor to the Prime Minister. From 2010, he worked at the General Secretariat of the Council of the European Union, initially as the head of the cabinet of the Secretary General of the Council, and from 2016 as the director responsible for budget, taxation, and regional policy. Mr. Marek Mora became a member of the bank board of the Czech National Bank in 2017, and the President of the Czech Republic appointed him as Deputy Governor in December 2018. Our next guest is Mikhail Holland from Zagreb. Mr. Faulend is the Vice Governor of the Croatian National Bank. He started his career in the Croatian National Bank in 1997 in the Research Department. Between 2001 and 2003, he was assistant to the Executive Director of the IMF Dutch constituency. After returning to the Croatian National Bank, he continued his work in the Research Department as advisor, and in 2004, he was appointed Executive Director for International Affairs. He is author of several academic papers on economic issues. Mr. Faulend was appointed Vice Governor of the Croatian National Bank, first in 2013, and he was reappointed for his second six-year term of office as Vice Governor in 2019. Mr. Faulend is responsible for the international relations of the National Bank. Our next guest is from Budapest, Mr. Barnabás Virág. Mr. Barnabás Virág is the Deputy Governor of the Hungarian National Bank. As Deputy Governor, Mr. Virág has been responsible for monetary policy and financial stability since June 2020. From 2015 until his appointment as Deputy Governor, he served as Executive Director of the Hungarian National Bank, responsible for monetary policy and economic analysis. From 2003, he worked as the analyst at the National Bank, and prior to that, he taught at the Budapest University of Economics and State Administration, and was also an analyst at the Ministry of Finance. Our next guest is Mr. Ľudovít Ódor from Bratislava. Mr. Odor is Deputy Governor of the National Bank of Slovakia. Mr. Odor has been the Deputy Governor of the bank since 2018. In the early years of his career, he worked as financial markets analyst at the Československá obchodná banka, later at the Slovak Rating Agency. He worked in the public administration as chief economist at the Ministry of Finance, and between 2010 and 2012, Mr. Odor was advisor to the Slovak Prime Minister and then to the Slovak Finance Minister. He was also vice chair of the network of European Union independent fiscal institutions. Between 2012-2018, Mr. Odor was member of the Council for Budget Responsibility. Mr. Odor has been a visiting professor at the Central European University since 2016. Dear colleagues, now I will put you a few questions, and I will kindly invite you to share with us your views. Of course, commenting each other's opinion is always very welcome. Let's start with the first question. I start with a quotation. Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, said in July 2020, "The euro is a tangible symbol of European unity, prosperity, and solidarity. This decision about the entry into the ERM2 recognizes the important economic reforms already undertaken by Bulgaria and Croatia, while confirming the continued attractiveness of Europe's single currency." Dear colleagues, what do you think about this statement presenting the euro as a tangible symbol of unity, prosperity, and solidarity at the level of the Union? How can it be reflected by the results and the lessons learned since the introduction of the euro? Dear colleagues, if you allow me, first I would like to start with Mr. Odor, as Mr. Odor is representing the only country in this circle which is already using the euro. Mr. Odor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this kind invitation and to have this opportunity to discuss these very interesting issues among us, since we are coming from a very similar background as far as economic development is concerned, but we have chosen somewhat different economic strategies. And this is a great opportunity to exchange our views and trying to learn from the lessons of others, or trying to advise and help all those who are just thinking or entering the ERM2 mechanism. Of course, the quotation is coming not from an economist, but a politician. So I do not think this is a headline for a research paper. It is more about reflecting the general assessment of the euro by the citizens. So let's look at some recent Eurobarometer polls in order to understand how the euro is viewed inside EU. I'm not just talking about the euro area member states, but all EU countries. So, but first, let's look at the club. The club members are saying that the euro is a good thing for the EU as a whole, and 80% of the respondents are saying that. So this is really an overwhelming majority. And why? The main reason behind that is that it is easier to do business. That is at least the view of the population. Even if we look at countries not inside the euro area, but inside the EU, that question has a relatively large positive response. So basically, we can say that even in Romania or in Hungary, it is more than 60%. There is one country, our Czech colleagues, where there is not so overwhelming positive support, but this actually reflects the situation quite well. And I was also interested in looking into regional differences, because one might think that maybe for some of the peripheral countries of the euro area, the euro might be a burden or a problem. But even in those countries, there is a quite nice support, 70 or 75%, like in Italy. And surprisingly, the Netherlands is with the lowest figures, where 68% of the population claims that the euro is a good thing in general for the European Union. So if we, and I'm quite sure we will have a chance to discuss it in more details, but if we look at the three issues Ursula von Leyen raised, I really think that it shows the unity, because it is a single currency. So from that perspective, it is a nice symbol of unity. Solidarity. If we look at, for example, the euro area sovereign debt crisis, we can see some signs of solidarity, even with the COVID crisis, and some of the new programs are clearly showing solidarity towards some of the member states. And the third thing, prosperity, where I would say that there are good and bad examples. And just to highlight what I'm going to tell you later, is that from my perspective, the single most important issue is to change the mindset when the country enters the euro area, and change the policies accordingly, because at the end, it is not about a euro that we fail or we succeed, but about our economic policies. How can we cope with a fixed asset price or a floating asset price? And that will be my message later on. But for now, this is, I think, what I wanted to highlight at the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Odor. May I now invite Madam Kightley to share with us her views. The floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you very much. I will start off as well by thanking for the invitation to this panel discussion. It's a great pleasure to be here. And in general, I think I will start off with saying that in general, the European integration is a very important political project, which is aimed at improving economic well-being of the citizens of the Union, and by supporting balanced economic growth. And as my colleague from the Slovak Republic pointed out, it's popular with the citizens of the European zone. But when you are trying to look at positives and negatives, so costs and benefits of joining Euros, then you see clearly that the balance, it really depends on multiple factors. So I would like to look at the previous few crises, and one thing which is quite important to see is that over the last 10 years, the convergence within the Eurozone has basically stopped, and even for some countries from the south, they started to diverge from the biggest economies, from Germany and France. And when you look at the 2008 crisis and then the sovereign debt crisis, you see that the dispersion of the business cycle has strengthened over this period. So there was a common shock, but then the reactions of the economies were very different. And some of the dispersion, parts of it can be attributed to the underlying features of the single monetary union. So what I'm trying to say is that you kind of have to see this as well, and also I pointed out to some features of the monetary union, initial ones, which then contributed to the dispersion, but they have been mended over time. Some of them have been mended over time. So 2020 crisis has been very different, and clearly the monetary union was able to react very differently to the crisis. But in my position, when we are looking at our situation in the past crises, we see that we actually have clearly benefited from keeping our independent monetary policy. So in 2008, what happened was that the Polish zloty depreciated really substantially, and it acted as a very, very strong shock absorber for us. So Polish economy actually went through this crisis without going into recession. It was the only European country to be in such a situation. So the depreciation of Polish zloty helped the price competitiveness of the economy, and you could achieve it also through internal devaluation, but it's a much more difficult process, much more painful, involving increase in most cases increase in unemployment and problems with servicing debt. In 2020, we were able to react also very swiftly to the crisis. We were able to tailor our decisions and our tools to the needs of our economy, and also the support of the National Bank of Poland has really helped the economy to go through the crisis. And again, this time we went into recession, but it was one of the shallowest recessions in Europe. So that's our sort of perspective. That's what we see.
Thank you very much, Madam Kightley, and thank you for the concrete examples concerning the crisis in 2008 and 2020. Now I would come to Mr. Faulend in Zagreb. Mr. Faulend, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I would also like to thank for the invitation for this very nice panel and interesting topics that we are discussing. Related and regarding the question that you put on the floor, and that is the dimensions that Euro covers, and this in particular, the unity, prosperity, and solidarity. In principle and in short, I can only say that I agree that the Euro really covers all these three dimensions, and they have become particularly noticeable in times of crisis, such as recent COVID-19 turmoil, when the Euro served, and it still serves as an umbrella protecting the entire Euro area against the storm. With regard to the unity, I recall what Mr. Odor said on the Eurobarometer and the data. I may only add one thing to that, and that is that the Euro is definitely the most tangible symbol of the unity. as euro banknotes and coins are part of citizens' everyday lives. So they have them in their pockets and they feel like being Europeans exclusively because of the euro. And in that sense, euro really has this importance of being a symbol of the unity in the EU more overall. The second item, prosperity. The euro area, as we all know, is a currency union composed of the more advanced European countries, and the euro is the second most important global reserve currency. Therefore, when a new country adopts the euro, its reputation in economic and political spheres instantly improves. In addition to these reputational benefits, the introduction of the euro has a direct positive impact on the country's growth potential. The euro is appealing because it makes the country more resilient to negative shocks, more cost efficient and competitive, while it also enables the country to have better access to the international financial markets. All this in turn facilitates investment, employment, economic growth. And finally, when it comes to solidarity, it was also already mentioned that euro served the role, which was very evident during the sovereign debt crisis, and it really provided the most affected countries with emergency financing. But also at the very same time, it helped the countries which were not affected by the crisis, because in the crisis times, it is irrespective of the fact that whether the country is having a problem or not, all countries are being affected with a negative impact. So what was important with this emergency financing when these countries were provided with it is that the interest rates were much lower than the ones charged by the IMF or similar institutions on their loans. And this subsidized lending helped these crisis-affected countries to get through this period, not only with savings on the interest cost, but also with the fact that they had access to the market, which they would hardly have given the overall circumstances. So in general, all in all, I can really agree with the statement that you put forward on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Faulend. I liked your statement about the euro as a tangible symbol. We have so many abstract symbols, and indeed, if something tangible and can be touched, that's really the euro, the common currency. Many thanks for these views. Now I would come to Prague, to Mr. Marek Mora. How you see these questions from your bank? The floor is yours.
Good afternoon from Prague, and thank you very much for the invitation to this very distinguished club of speakers. I would like to share with you my personal view on this issue, and I will do it from the perspective of the country which Ľudovít Odor rightly mentioned, which is one of the, let's say, more Eurosceptical, if not the most Eurosceptical ones. And I always say that there are maybe some reasons behind these skepticisms, and I will maybe try to explain some of them. In 2019, the euro celebrated 20 years of its existence. In 2022, it will celebrate 20 years as a currency in circulation. So it will be this, let's say, the tangible symbol, which is maybe more relevant to people. And if you look at these 20 years, there I would say in terms of both prosperity and unity, that the evidence is somewhat mixed. If you look at figures, for instance, at the GDP per capita, then we saw that we are still, behind the levels of the United States and of Japan or of the UK. And even in the first decade of the existence of the euro, the growth rates of the GDP per capita were weaker than in these three countries. In the second decade after the great financial crisis, the growth rates were comparable. Where we did, or the euro area did better than these, three countries was in the activity rate, which is the percentage of those in working age who are either working, either employed or looking for a job. And this activity rate has been increasing. And basically, back in 97, let's say we were 8 percentage points below the United States. And since 2010, we are above the United States, and we have a much higher activity rate when we compare ourselves, let's say, to this very important economic country or bloc, which is the United States. So on this, there I would say the prosperity is, I would say, somewhat mixed. And I think it is even more mixed when you look at an indicator for unity, which I looked at numbers of economic convergence, and it was already mentioned by the vice president of the Polish National Bank, very rightly, where we see basically that the economic convergence across the euro area does not take place. It was at the beginning of the euro, one of the objectives was that the euro would try to help countries to converge, and the fact is that they did not. If you look at the, let's say, the coefficient of variation of the GDP per capita in PPP, before the crisis, it was 0.15 for, let's say, the old euro area member states, for the euro area 12. And after the crisis, the variation coefficient doubled. It decreased from 0.15 to 0.3, which means that the convergence was substantial, and the convergence took place mainly among the old member states of the euro area. So it was not due to the fact that newcomers came with much lower level of the GDP. So I think that both in terms of prosperity and of unity, euro being an engine of economic conversion, it didn't work very well. On the other hand, if you look at, let's say, at the Czech Republic, we have been continuously converging towards the EU average. If you look at our GDP per capita figures in PPP, we were in the year 2020 at the level of 94% of the EU average, which is the same level as Italy and higher than Slovenia, Spain, or Portugal. But of course, you can say, GDP might be not a very relevant indicator, because especially in the Czech Republic, we have a very high share of foreign-owned capital, or we also have a high share of foreign workers. So you could take the much less used indicator, which is, let's say, the GNI per capita, the gross national income. But even there, the Czech Republic is at the level of 87% of EU average, or it was back in 2019, which is the same level, let's say, like Slovenia, and we are still at the top of former socialist countries. So what I want to say by this is that I think that actually the convergence or the prosperity is not so much given, or you can converge very well in both monetary policy framework, both with the euro or without euro, if the monetary policy or the economic policy setup is correct. And I think we in the Czech Republic are very well served with our framework, where I think the monetary policy framework, which is inflation targeting, this flexible exchange rate, serves us very, very well. Whereas I think for some countries in the Eurozone, it could be a bit of a problem. And I think it has to do with the fact that the Eurozone was constructed at the beginning, let's say, mainly by political considerations, which were quite different from what was, in my view, foreseen in the Treaty of Maastricht. And this creates ongoing problems, ongoing structural weaknesses of the Eurozone. And that's why some of the countries, unfortunately, are not able to converge in this framework. Let me make a comment on our friends from Croatia and Bulgaria, where I think they are in a different situation, because as we all know, these countries used a currency peg towards euro. Bulgaria had a currency board. I think Croatia, you also pegged kuna towards euro. And of course, in this context, it is very, in my view, very reasonable to try, to have the first order euro, right, to be in a second order club if you can get the euro because you do not use the flexible exchange rate in your economic policy. So if you think this is the right thing to do, then I accept it. But in the Czech Republic, we have a very different history, a very different monetary policy framework, and I think we are well served with what we have. And given the weaknesses of the euro area, of which we are maybe going to talk a bit later, I don't see many strong reasons why the Czech Republic should join the club. And in this sense, I must say that I have some reservations towards the statement, which is a political statement, which I understand, of course, by Madame Ursula von der Leyen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mora. I'm happy that I have found a quotation which is provoking maybe a bit different interpretations. And thanks for the data which you presented to support your arguments. Now let's come to Budapest, and I would like to invite Mr. Virág to take the floor and share his views with us. Mr. Virág, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to also thank the invitation to the panel. It's a pleasure to be here and to meet with my colleagues from the region through the internet. So starting with the sentence you quoted, Gábor, I can say that I'm more skeptical regarding that assessment, and I think nowadays it's rather a wish than the current situation within the Eurozone, and I think the President of the European Commission a little bit emphasized the role of the common currency in the European unity and prosperity and solidarity. Assessing the situation of the euro within the European Union, I think the situation improved a lot in the last decade. I absolutely agree with Ľudovít that there were big successes, big achievements in the last decade. I think one of the big and one of the largest achievement is that the overall assessment of the euro nowadays is more positive within the Eurozone countries than it was a decade ago. So I think it's a big achievement because nowadays, as Ľudovít mentioned, 80% of the societies are supportive regarding the euro. 1 decade ago, 10 years ago, when the Greek crisis hit the Eurozone, this share was around 65%, and 1/4 of the society said that to have the euro is a bad thing. So I think it's a very positive trend within the Eurozone. The other positive thing is that the mentioned crisis management within the euro area. I think the policymakers within the Eurozone learned a lesson from the last financial crisis, and during the COVID-19 crisis, they did a much better job looking at the numbers in the labor market, in the real GDP, and so on. So I think we can see some improvements in the macro policy as well. But if I look at the other side of the coin, I have to say that there are still a lot of questions on the table. The question number one is the GDP performance of the Eurozone and the GDP performance of the member countries. And if I compare the share of the Eurozone within the world GDP to the other big economies like the US and China, it's clear that in the last 2 decades, the Eurozone lost some shares within the world GDP. That's the fact number 1. The fact number 2, that if you look at the GDP per capita position of the member states, there are 7 member states nowadays within the Eurozone where the GDP per capita level is higher than that level we saw when these countries entered into the Euro area. These countries are the Baltic countries on one hand, and some very, very special countries like Ireland, Malta, and Luxembourg. In case of all of the other countries, the relative GDP per capita level stagnated or decreased in the last 2 decades. So that's why I said to say that the euro is the tangible symbol of prosperity. To me, it's a little bit doubtful. Turning to some other factors, I think the institutional reform of the Eurozone is still unfinished. It's clear that there were some very important steps ahead, but some very important pillar is still missing. And just one final comment regarding the internal position of the countries within the Eurozone, looking at the internal balances, internal imbalances. It was a big issue before the last financial crisis, that there was big differences in the current account position of the countries before 2008 and 2009. And if you look at the situation nowadays, on the one hand, we can say that those countries on the southern part of the Eurozone who had big current account deficits, nowadays they have near zero current account balance. So we can say that it's okay. But on the other hand, the GDP level of Italy and Greece is still far below the 2008 level. So the price of this balance sheet, the price of this adjustment in the current account was a very weak economic growth, very weak GDP growth on the southern part of Europe. And in line with that, I think it can generate some issues looking ahead for these countries. While on the other side, if I look at the current account position of the northern countries, the situation doesn't change. So they still have a very, very huge current account surplus. I do not see any adjustment process and adjustment solutions for that. And this type of behavior of the northern countries practically means that some internal demand is missing from the Eurozone, because the import of the northern countries from the southern part of Europe is still relatively weak. So for me, it's clear that the euro and the Eurozone stepped ahead in many fields. So nowadays the situation is better than a decade ago, but there are still a lot of things to do. And for those countries who are outside the Eurozone, for us, I think to join to the Euro and Euro area and to introduce the Euro is not the final stage of our task, because our task is to achieve a long-term sustainable catching up story. So nowadays we are a less developed countries. Our GDP per capita level is around 70-75% relative to the EU average. So our task is to make a sustainable catching up story, and we have to find the proper timing for the euro introduction within this route.
Thank you very much, dear Barnabás. I appreciate that you presented a good balance of arguments pro and contra. I think it was a quite well-defined picture of the advantages and risks of the Eurozone. As dear guests, all of you did a bit similar approach. I think it's much appreciated. Dear colleagues, now let's turn to our region. Although some of you already mentioned specific features of our countries, but let's come a bit closer to our countries. So there are views about competitiveness risks of the peripheral countries, as has already been mentioned, warning against the early introduction of the common currency, arguing about the lack of an optimum currency area. How do you see this, dear colleagues? Are the Central European economies competitive enough? Has the convergence reached a sufficiently high level for an early or short-term introduction of the euro? If you would allow me now, I would like to ask first Madam Kightley from Warsaw to say a few words about this question. Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you. We've talked about the catching up. We've done a lot of, our region has done a lot of catching up over the last 20 years, but some of us at least have a long way to go. Marek Mora mentioned how far you've gone. For us, when we compare ourselves to Germany, the GDP per capita PPP is only 63% of the German equivalent. So we still have a big room for improvement. But as I said, we've done a lot. But when you look at the reasons why we did so well, it's mostly for some of our countries is through the international trade. For Poland, we have increased our share in the world exports from 0.5 in the early 90s to 1.5 last year. So it's a big growth. And our countries are involved in regional value chains, but our role is quite often relies on cheap labor, basically on price competitiveness. So, and it is easy to replace. So so basically that's one thing. And another thing is that the structure of our economies, and in particular of Polish economy, is different to the advanced Eurozone countries. When you look at the labor market, we still have quite a lot of labor force in the agricultural sector. We have 10% of our labor force is in the agricultural sector versus I think 3% in the advanced Euro area countries. There is also, we are less innovative, definitely less innovative than the Eurozone countries. We are more reliant on manufacturing, actually similarly to Germany, but not to other advanced European Eurozone countries. There is also, with the labor market, our labor markets are also more flexible. We have quite a big percentage of our labor force self-employed, so there is much less strength of trade unions in Poland. So given those two things, so there's still the big income gap and the structure, I think we are still quite far from the optimum currency area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Kightley, and thank you for giving concrete examples about the Polish economy, which are quite relevant indeed. Let's continue. Let's continue with Zagreb. So I invite Mr. Faulend to take the floor, please.
Thank you very much. In my view, prudent economic policy making is a key determinant for successful functioning of a country in the euro area. And the competitiveness issues that some peripheral EU countries that you mentioned have roots in their economic policy making, in particular fiscal policy and wage policy, rather than in euro as a common currency per se. Similarly, for countries which are still not in the Eurozone, consideration on optimum timing of the euro introduction should primarily depend on their policies, which can amplify or reduce both internal and external macroeconomic imbalances. One should be also mindful about potential limitations of monetary and exchange rate policy in some countries. The word on that was said before in the previous discussion. In principle, there are two clubs of countries. Some have more space for maneuver for independent monetary policy conduct, which includes more flexible exchange rate policy. Others have less, if any. To which club a single country will belong mainly depends on how small the country is, how much integrated trade-wise and financially it is with the Eurozone, and how much euroized it is. Without doubt, those countries which belong to the former club, in other words, less space for maneuver, have incentive to enter the Eurozone sooner rather than later. And this is obviously the case with Croatia and Bulgaria, as it was mentioned in the previous discussion. And this is specifically because they cannot use their exchange rate to anyway. Having said that, the level of convergence reached by the countries is not a hard indicator according to which a country should base its decision whether to join or not the Eurozone. Similarly, neither optimal currency area criteria are also not hard indicators for euro adoption. In addition, one has also to be mindful of other elements, in particular the level of euroization. Thank you.
That's quite interesting. Many thanks. Many thanks, Mr. Faulend. This was very concise and very much to the point. Let's come now back to Prague, to Mr. Mora. Mr. Mora, what do you think?
I will also speak from the perspective of the Czech Republic, so I will not ask or answer the question in general terms, because you asked about if all Central European economies have reached sufficiently high level of convergence. So I will speak about the Czech Republic. What we are doing here every year is to make our own assessment of the situation, of our readiness or preparedness for joining the euro area. We do it in the central bank, and now together with the government every 2 years, we make a recommendation or we make a statement if we think we should join or not. And this assessment is very much linked to the optimal currency area theory, though maybe there are some deviations. So we are looking basically at the convergence, though I agree that it is not, I fully agree that it is not should not be a hard criterion for joining. We look at nominal, real, cyclical convergence. We look at the flexibility of our labor market, because we know if you don't have an exchange rate, then some of the adjustment can take place through flexible labor markets. We look at the flexibility of our fiscal policy, because if you don't have exchange rate, then you might deploy your fiscal policy. And we also look at such criteria like economic structure, trade integration, etc. In the end, we come every year, and we have come so far every year. These assessments have been done since 2008, I think. And every year we have come to the conclusions that the Czech Republic should not join. There are arguments both in favor, which is let's say the trade independence, the ownership structure, which is very much linked. We have many owners from the euro area. We have quite flexible labor market. You probably know that the Czech Republic for some years already has the lowest unemployment rate in the EU. Now we are somewhere close to 3%. We had for a long time only 2%. So there are arguments which would, we would say, okay, we could enter, but then we always find some arguments against entering the Eurozone, mainly linked to the unfinished convergence, especially the nominal convergence. We also have some doubts about our fiscal situation, especially about the long-term sustainability of our public finances and also the economic structure, especially the higher share of industry, like in Poland, which of course makes you more likely to have to be subject of an asymmetric shock. And based on these arguments, we always recommend the government not to enter the euro. Okay, this is the official position. If you asked me personally, I would think that the Czech Republic could join the euro area tomorrow. We would not be, we would not be doing worse than our Slovak colleagues or our Baltic colleagues. I think we would manage equally well, and I think these countries are actually doing quite well within the eurozone. Of course, we would have here and there some issue, but if there was a political will, I don't think that these arguments are really, very, very much, how should I say, hardcore arguments against joining the eurozone. It's much more, let's say, the question of political will. So from the optimal currency area theory perspective, where you can ask yourself to what extent it is relevant or not, I would say that the Czech Republic would not have a major problem. My problem with the eurozone is different. My problem is with the composition, which I tried to say in my first intervention, is the structural issues within the eurozone. I think the eurozone faces substantial structural weaknesses, and that's why I would not recommend us to join, because on the other hand, our economic policy framework and monetary policy framework is good, is credible, it works well. So why should we give it up to have something where I think there are some difficulties? So obviously our assessment is different from what the Commission is doing. The Commission and the ECB every 2 years is writing, they are writing their convergence reports, which is based on different assessment, mainly on these convergence criteria, of which there has been also a long debate to what extent they are relevant, but at least legally speaking, they are still there. And this is the way how the European institutions assess the situation. For me as economist, what will be interesting to see is, again, the case of Bulgaria and Croatia, which are now joining or have joined the ERM2 and hope to be entering the Eurozone, Euro area. But at the same time, both these countries, and I think they are the only ones in this group of countries which are discussing here, which are in the macroeconomic imbalances procedure. And there, I would like to see how the European institutions will, treat these two countries, because from the economic perspective, if you have an issue there, maybe you should be a bit more careful. But I know that first, I have nothing to say there, and second, I know that the assessment in the convergence reports is done on other issues. But now I think they are trying also to somehow integrate these other considerations as well, but to what extent they will do it will be interesting to see. So to sum it up, from the Czech perspective, formally speaking, we say always that we are not ready, that we are not yet there. If you ask me privately, I would say, okay, maybe we are not, but on the other hand, we would manage to survive in the Eurozone quite well without any problem, I think.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mora, and particularly thanks for your personal touches and your personal views about the issue, and presenting the official position and what you think as an economist. Should not very much different than the official position, but still much appreciated. Thank you very much. Now I would like to come to Budapest back. Mr. Virág, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so for me, I mentioned the numbers regarding the GDP per capita changes within the Eurozone. And for me, the key lesson is that to improve the competitiveness position of a country, or to cope with structural issues within the Eurozone, it's a much tougher game than outside the Eurozone, especially when a crisis hit the economies. So I don't want to say that the only reason behind this phenomenon, the euro. So I think it's clear that it's not only it's not only a euro issue, but it's clear that to improve the competitiveness with a common monetary policy, it's a much tougher task looking at the effects of the last 2 decades. So that's why my answer is that when we assess the readiness to join the euro in case of a country, it's not enough to look at the nominal criteria. It's also important to look at the real criteria like the competitiveness. So it's clear that if a country's development is significantly below the euro average, as in our case here in Hungary, the inflation surplus resulting from the convergence may be too high. So I think that's one of the lessons we saw in case of the southern countries before the last financial crisis. If a country's corporate sector, products and workforce are not competitive enough, it can significantly slow down the catching up process. It's another lesson. And finally, if the financial system is not sufficiently developed, the introduction of the euro will be undermined from both a financial stability and a monetary policy point of view. So that's why here in the Central Bank of Hungary, we emphasize that to fulfill the Maastricht criteria is not enough to properly measure a country's euro maturity. The opinion that the fiscal indicators in the Maastricht criteria are necessary, but we need to take a much wider range into account when measuring euro maturity has recently gained ground in the international professional dialogue as well. In 2 years ago, the MNB has also set up a new criteria, so-called Maastricht 2.0 criteria system, which takes into account the real economic convergence, the synchronization of the business and financial cycles with the euro area, the competitiveness in terms of both companies and labor market, and a stable and developed domestic financial system. And based on this new criteria, I can say that several Eurozone members joined too early, while on the other hand, there are some countries outside the Eurozone, like the Czech Republic, who is much better prepared to join the euro, to join to the euro area. But of course, I know well the opinion of Marek. So that's my answer. I think the real convergence and the strong competitiveness and well-prepared competitiveness situation is an important factor for the Central European countries, because, as I mentioned, our final goal is to find the sustainable catching up pattern, and within this pattern, we are still committed to a safe and successful euro implementation, but of course we have to find the optimal timing regarding that decision, and before the decision we have to assess both the nominal and the real criteria. I think in case of Hungary there are a lot of things to do to be better prepared for the euro implementation.
Thank you very much, dear Barnabás. That's also a very clear view and a clear stance. Let's now come to Bratislava, to Mr. Odor, who has the most experience about what the euro meant for Slovakia. Mr. Odor, the floor is yours.
Yes, so I will start with a disclaimer. So I was a co-author of the Euro adoption strategy some 18 years ago, so I might be biased. This is I wanted to say at the beginning, and just to illustrate how big changes were in Europe at that time. Hungary wanted to join the Euro area in 2008, and we were lagging behind Hungary because we said that we will join in 2009. But that is just to illustrate the huge changes which were evident in the last 2 decades. Let's start with a general question: to what extent we need to achieve a kind of a sufficient level of convergence before entering? I mean, real convergence. I don't buy that argument, actually. It's if you look at the US, I guess that the least developed state is Mississippi with 60% of GDP of the average. So I think most of the countries, and here I agree with Marek, that most of the countries in this panel would do relatively okay with the right policies inside the Euro area. So that is again what I wanted to highlight. And I also do not buy very much the arguments that we will have to wait for a situation like heaven on the earth, that everything will be fine, fiscal positions will be sustainable, labor markets 100% flexible, optimal currency area criteria 100% nice. So I don't think that is the right question to ask when a country is thinking about joining the Euro area or not. And here I agree most of my predecessors that actually it is a much more complicated question, and it depends on the history of the institutions in the country, the history of exchange rate mechanism, the structure of the economy, the structure of dependence on euro already in the sector, the opinions of the people. There are many things one should assess. So that is for sure. On the other hand, sometimes you need also a clear leader in order, to even because you will not have 100% guarantee that when you join the Euro area you will succeed. So sometimes you need a leader taking some risks down the road and to manage the country towards some goals, because nobody will guarantee you 100% success. And from that perspective, I do not see Euro as a destiny that if you join the Euro you will do badly or you will do goodly. I think there is life outside the Euro area, but also inside. That I think that you can manage your economy relatively okay, also inside and outside the Euro area. And let's be honest, actually, that we all need all these those countries who are participating right now need a successful Euro area. So that would be nice for everybody, for us, even when you are outside, and I can see legitimate reasons staying outside for a while. So I'm not criticizing those countries staying outside, because I understand that it is a huge complicated question based on the history, the institutional setup of the country, as I mentioned. So I wanted to say also that you can do very badly also inside the Euro area if you do not adjust your policies. So I will not name a country, but if a country was used to solve every problem of competitiveness with depreciation of the currency, then for that country there will be a huge pain inside the Euro area, because that is not allowed anymore. So you need to adjust your whole policy setup in order to deal with the problems inside the Euro area. And that was clearly visible at our attitude when we tried to join the Euro area, because we said that no, first we need to do structural reforms. We need to do our homework, and not just going into the Euro area, because Euro area, it is not a destiny. So we really need to have a more flexible economy. And that is why we carried out a bunch of structural reforms between 2003 and 2005. And I was also involved on those. And that was the reason why we actually postponed the euro area by 1 more year in order to fully carry out the ambitious package of reforms. So to summarize, what I wanted to say is that for me, less important the level of the real convergence, less important whether optimal currency area is 100%, 95%, or just 80%. It is much more important whether the country, with its institutions, with its history, will be able to adjust its mindset to do policies differently. And the 3 most important policies, from my experience, are, of course, fiscal policy, macroprudential policy, and labor market policy. So without doing those 3 things right, you will never succeed inside the euro area. But of course, equally well applies that if you mess up your monetary policy outside the euro area, again, you will be in trouble. So I do not see it as a destiny. I see it as a potential, and with the right policies, you can harness that potential if you are prepared to. So that is my message. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Odor. That's also a very clear view. I'm happy to see, and if you allow me, I was happy to probably smiling a bit because I am very much enjoying that you have many common messages amongst you, but there are still some different views. And actually, that's the purpose of this discussion, to see what are the possible options in this region. And if you allow me, I see that that almost all of you said that whether it's an optimum currency area or not, well, it's important, but that's not the most important factor. And all of you said that the economic policy choices in general, the structural policy choices may be more important, with an impact on the competitiveness, on the sustainability of the public finances, on the labor market. Almost all of you were on the same line. And but there was one point where there was a bit of divergence, whether the convergence and the catching up is important or more important or less important. Well, if you are always welcome to comment each other, but maybe we can continue if you like, if you agree. Yes, then yes, Mr. Virág, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just a quick comment to Ľudovít. So first of all, I absolutely agree with you that the quality of macro policy is more important in longer term than to use the euro or your own currency. So absolutely agree with you that you can make good policy inside the Eurozone, and of course you can do bad macro policy outside the Eurozone with your own currency. So I think it's not a question. So let me. For me, it would be interesting to hear about the Slovakian case, because to look at your macro numbers, it seems to me that Slovakia and the Slovakian economy was extremely successful in the first decade of the 21st century. Your government and your policymakers made a lot of structural reforms before your country introduced the euro. But look at the GDP per capita numbers. It seems to me that this very fast and robust catching up story stopped in the last decade. So why Slovakia wasn't able to continue this successful competitiveness reforms you started in the first decade, in the second decade? So for me, it would be interesting to see. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Barnabás. Dear Ľudovít, would you comment? Would you give an answer to that question?
Yes, just very shortly, of course. The not so serious answer is that I'm not there anymore, so I'm not doing the structural reform stuff anymore. But of course, that is just a joke, but just a half a joke, because if you look at the performance of Slovakia in structural indicators, I'm not talking about nominal convergence or whatever, any kind of a structure indicator, business environment, IT readiness, digitalization, you name it. In the last 10 years, we did almost nothing. And in many aspects, we were lagging behind. And this, I think, clearly illustrates that what you mentioned at the beginning of your intervention, that you really need the right policies. So it is not enough just to join the euro area and go to Hawaii. It's not a good approach. You really need to roll up your sleeves and work hard enough on structural matters. Otherwise, you will be stuck. And I'm quite openly criticizing this situation. And I've been a critic of the government for the last, I don't know, 10 years on it. So this is maybe a bit biased personal view, but definitely Slovakia is not doing well in any of those structural indicators, and it seems that we are struck in the so-called middle income trap, and we need a huge push again in order to get out in the near future. So that is a quite concise answer. Of course, we can bilaterally discuss in more details, but I think the basic message is this one.
Thank you very much, Ľudovít.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Odor. I think it was quite interesting what you said about the difference between the 2 decades, what Slovakia spent in the Eurozone. Dear colleagues, let me come to our next question. We have already been touched upon a bit the crisis situation, particularly the crisis in 2008. Now, this crisis led to a substantial stability mechanism of the Eurozone. It has been developed since then. What do you think? Is the price of the solidarity and stability mechanism proportional to the advantages of the mechanism? So has it been worse? First, I would like to ask Zagreb, Mr. Faulend, what he thinks about it.
Thank you for the question. So the European Stability Mechanism, yes, the establishment of it is one definitely of a key institutional reforms that were carried out in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. And in my personal view, the benefits of ESM so far definitely outweighed its costs. When we talk about the benefits, the ESM, as we all know, has a large lending capacity, 500 billion euros, and it guarantees resilience and stability in times of stress, in particular being ready to provide low cost, as we mentioned already, and long-term funding to individual distressed countries. It also helps to prevent spillover effects and maintain financial stability in the euro area as a whole. I already mentioned in my previous address that the sovereign debt crisis shows that solidarity in times of financial stress benefits not only countries in need, but also fundamentally healthy countries, and this is an important point, which suffer as well if the whole euro area is persistently in a crisis mode. Let me also provide you with a good example, and this is a Greek example, as they still today have 57% of public debt through the ESM, including, of course, EFSF, an average interest rate of 1.1%, an average maturity of 39 years. Annual cost savings for the budget, Greek budget, is estimated annually at 6.7% of GDP. So we are talking about a huge transfer and a help support for the economy. On the other hand, when we talk about the costs, as we all know, the cost of ESM mainly relate to the paid-in capital, which is 80.5 billion. And for a single country, this is a cost that on average accounts to less than 1% of GDP. It has also to be noted, in addition, that euro area members have subscribed further 624 billion euros for the ESM unpaid callable capital, and it serves as additional protection and thus enable the ESM to obtain this highest credit rating. But this callable capital, as we all know, is only a potential cost to be called only in highly unlikely scenarios. So basically, when we weight the costs and the benefits, I personally don't have a doubt that ESM is doing overall a very important and good thing for the overall and whole Eurozone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Faulend, for a very concrete example. Let's come now to Prague. How Mr. Mora sees this question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would see basically two groups of this price of the solidarity and stability, which is, I think, being paid for these advantages in the European mechanism to strengthen the Eurozone. The first group of arguments is linked to the fact that I think that many of these changes which have been introduced after 2008 quite substantially change the original contract, which I think was mainly the Maastricht Treaty. Maybe not legally, but at least economically. And let me explain it. When I went to university, I learned about the economics of monetary union from Paul de Grauwe, which is one of the biggest guru in this area. He even has a very good textbook on this. And what I learned was, for instance, there was a no bailout clause in the treaties, and the meaning or the reasoning of this clause was that it should be the financial market which brings the discipline and which basically punishes the fiscally irresponsible countries by giving them risk premia, which will then hopefully make them more fiscally responsible. So this was the logic of the no bailout clause. Now we see the policy of the ECB, which tries to compress the risk premia, and we say this is something good. We also have the ESM, which, as we all know, at the beginning, there was a big debate if the creation of the ESM actually does not go in the opposite of the logic of this no bailout clause. Second, the operations of the ECB, quantitative easing, also seen by some economists, at least, and some people, as not being in line with the ban of monetary financing. We saw last year that there was a case before the German Constitutional Court, which had some consequences, and even now is having some consequences, because now it is the European Commission which is bringing to the court the German government, because they said it was ultra vires, the decision of the ECB and the decision of the European Court of Justice. We see now, let's say, the next generation EU program. When I went to school, it was impossible. I learned everywhere that the European public finance has to be in balance. Then the expenditure has to be exactly the same as the revenues. Now we create a European debt. I didn't see any change of any treaty, so I don't know either what they taught me when I was at the university was based on some very vague arguments, or something changed in between, which I didn't notice, etc., etc. So one can continue. Why do I say that? I think the price which we are paying for this, and I know that this does not belong to the strict area of central bankers, but I think it is a political price, because these arguments are politically picked up by some groups, some parties in some countries. We know the parties in Germany, but there are similar parties in the Netherlands. There are such parties in Finland. And I think this is something which we have to be at least aware of. I don't say that it creates a big danger for the monetary union, but we have to be aware of this. The second group of arguments, in my view, is economic, because I think that we are now concentrating or the euro area is concentrated very much at the reforms at the EU level or the euro area level as such, and less emphasis is put on individual member states. And I think that the risk is really that we create a moral hazard, because the member states which need structural reforms now, I think, do not put enough energy in implementing these reforms, which then in turn results in ongoing economic divergence with all the consequences which are linked to it, high unemployment, high public debt, etc., etc. And probably the reason is that the EU sees that the member states are not in a position to make such reforms, so they try to replace this lack of reforms at the member states level with these reforms at the European level. But I think it will simply not be enough. Not only that you create a moral hazard, I think, for the member states that they are not doing enough, but at the same time you will simply, if the pillars of the system are weak, I mean, whatever roof you will try to build on these weak pillars, in my view, it will not function. And this is my biggest worry. And actually, I consider this question of yours to be the most important in our debate. And I'm very worried about this. I think that everyone would be much better off if Italy introduces reform which finally increases its competitiveness, which finally decreases the public debt of Italy, which finally decreases the unemployment. The Italian citizen would benefit from it. The euro area citizens would benefit from it. We all would benefit. Even the Czechs would benefit. It would be to benefit for everyone. But we have been seeing, and sorry for taking or picking up the example of Italy, but I think it is a good example because we all know what we are talking about. Italy has been not growing for 30 years. It is not competitive. And I'm not sure if the next generation EU, which allocates a lot of money to this country, will change anything about it. And I think these changes are badly needed. And unless these issues are addressed by the euro area, I think we will have a big problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Marek. I'm happy that you like the question. Actually, I had to resist the temptation to include a question about the next generation EU. You brought it in, which is absolutely fine. So many thanks. Let's now continue with Budapest. Dear Barnabás, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So answering your question, I think it's too early to judge that the price of solidarity and stability measures is proportional to the advantage of the mechanism or not. I think the balance nowadays is much better than 1 decade ago. So I absolutely agree with those thoughts that in many fields there were a lot of big achievements like the ESM and other or the next gen EU program or the crisis management we saw during this COVID-19 situation. So I think in many fields we stepped ahead. But on the other hand, I absolutely agree with Marek that in very important fields the solutions are still missing. So if I look at for example, the financial stability and issues and the banking system within the euro area, so we can say that to support the financial stability and the integration of the banking system, the banking union was created, and its first two pillars, the SSM and the SRM, including the loss-absorbing supranational single resolution fund, were established. So it's a big achievement, and it's a very important step. But the third pillar, and I think the most important pillar, the European Deposit Insurance Scheme, is still not completed. So we don't know how this issue will be solved. But I can touch the question of the fiscal union or more transfers within the Eurozone, or I can touch the internal imbalances how to deal with this issue. So I think there are still many important questions on the table, and the solutions are still, I think, debated. So in a nutshell, I think we will be able to judge that these steps are enough or not, and to decide this question is a more longer term issue. So I think now we don't know enough. It's clear that we stepped ahead in many fields, but many consequences will come in longer term, and only after that we can make the proper assessment of this question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Mr. Virág. Actually, I tend to agree that although these mechanisms are big achievements, still probably need to go through serious tests. And we hope that these tests will not come very soon. So many thanks. Now let me come to Bratislava. Mr. Odor, what do you think?
I don't like that question. And I tell you why. Because usually people, when asked about this question, they have in mind financial benefits and financial costs, which is completely meaningless in case of such an institution. I know that you are not having that in your mind, and I will answer it properly. But this is in many cases a misinterpretation that we should look at what we pay to the IMF and what we get from the IMF and whether there is a parity. It's the same question like with DS, and the same question as like unemployment insurance, how much I pay to unemployment insurance, how much I get back. So that is not about financial flows. It is not an investment. It's a kind of an insurance mechanism. So from that perspective, I always have to explain this, but I'm fully confident that this forum is more knowledgeable than just comparing euros on the benefit side and comparing euros on the cost side. But I think this is really one of the deepest questions we have to discuss today. And compared to Barnabás, I'm a bit more pessimistic. I don't think that time will tell. I think that time will tell that it is not enough. That I'm pretty sure that there are still very important missing elements in the institutional architecture of the euro area, and without tackling those problems, we will not succeed. We will have always a kind of a secondary solution, second best, third best solutions through monetary policy or through other channels, but we are not dealing with the core of the problem. And some of the problems when Odor mentioned, I wrote about those some years ago. That, from my perspective, of course, the banking union or the capital market union as such is very important, since compared to the US, we are not able to smooth many shocks through the capital market because we are very heavily bank financed inside the euro area. It is improving, but still we have missing elements and fragmentations on the capital market front. And also, I think that we haven't resolved the issue of bailouts versus fiscal sovereignty. That we cannot have both. It's impossible to have that. You can do whatever you want in fiscal, but then we will bail you out. That's a classical moral hazard problem. There are two potential solutions to it, two corner solutions. One is like in the US, that we have a fully credible no bailout clause. But then, of course, there is no need to control from the center. So the federal government is not controlling the fiscal situation of every state. Or a kind of a German solution where there is a bailout possibility, but then the center will dictate you what to do, because otherwise it is a bailout. I don't think that at this stage we can credible choose one or the other. What I think it is it will be a long journey. It will be a marathon, not a sprint, to achieve either of those solutions. But the worst thing is being in the middle of it and doing nothing on this front. So basically, we haven't seen any credible ideas about, ex ante sovereign restructuring mechanisms. On the one hand, if we want to go back credible to a no bailout clause, or we do not have a clear roadmap for a more fiscal integration. If we choose, for example, more the German model, still there is a lot of home bias inside the banking sector, and there are these doom loops between the banks and sovereigns. There are no concentration limit, no sovereign risk premia. So I think that other players can buy time many times, but at the end we will need to do these our homework, and we need to clear up this problem and address the deficiencies. But I understand that it is not an easy task. The United States started with a bailout, and it took more than 150 years to get to the no bailout state. But hopefully we can manage to resolve this in less time than 150 years, and then I will be happy. But I'm pretty sure that there is still much work to do on the institutional foundations of the euro area. Otherwise, it will be always a kind of a track which was not designed on purpose, but which was necessitated by the circumstances or conditions inside. So Jean Monnet said that Europe was forged in crisis. I do not want to wait 2 or 3 more crises in order to get this job done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Odor. I said to Marek that I'm happy that he liked my question, and I don't want to contradict myself, but I'm also happy that you did not like the question. Actually, I should have said that when I wrote this question, I put the issue of price of the stability mechanism into quotation marks, because I also agree that we are not talking about a return on investment, of course. So
I was telling that I'm pretty sure that was not on your mind, but usually I got this question in my country when we need to put a price tag on it, how much we put there, how much we get there, and what if we never get back something. So that is why I don't like the question. But as I mentioned, I think from a euro area perspective, that is the deepest question, how to think about the institutional mechanisms to make the euro area more resilient. So it is a good question, but I for other reasons do not like it.
Sure. Many thanks for this clarification. We still have a view from Warsaw. So, Madam Kightley, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. So much has already been said. I think I will be very brief. I agree that, in general, I think that it was a very good development, European Stability Mechanism and Banking Union. And I think I agree with Barnabás Virág that that there are still some elements missing, like the common guarantee, bank deposit guarantee fund. And I also agree that it's not about the paid-in capital so much as, in general, the calculation of broader benefits. But just maybe one more thing, it's when we look at the cost, one of the costs is also to some extent that you're passing on your competences onto the European level, and then the policies you implement, they are less tailored to your needs of your banks and of your financial system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Kightley. Yes, well, a lot of things has already been said, but thank you for your additional views. Dear colleagues, I have a few other questions, but maybe as many things have already been said, about the advantages and disadvantages. I would not come back to these general questions for the last question of this panel. I would put a seemingly simple question, but might not be too easy to answer. So, dear colleagues, what are your expectations about the future of the common monetary policy? Can we start with Zagreb? Mr. Faulend, would you be so kind to take the floor?
Yeah. Well, about the future of the common monetary policy, we see it to progress in the direction where it started. As you know, we as a Croatia opted to enter into the year 2 since we see clear benefits of entering into the common monetary policy. And for us, these benefits are not only numerous and they are not only significant, but what is more important even is that they are permanent in their nature. And when we compare these benefits, unlike costs, costs are temporary in nature. And from these economic grounds, we came around and we very clearly see and created our position to converge towards the Eurozone itself. I didn't in my previous address mentioned a number of the benefits that the Euro brings. And I would like to take the advantage of this moment to elaborate briefly on that. Croatia is a bit specific country in comparison to other countries at this panel. And it is specific in a way that it is the smallest country among the countries that are still outside the Eurozone. That's number one. It's fairly highly integrated, both financially and trade-wise, with the Eurozone. Perhaps in some areas relatively more, in some areas relatively less than the comparable countries. But the fact that completely puts Croatia in a different position from all other countries is the level of the Eurozation. And we see this exactly level of Eurozation as a key element which makes a difference when a country finds and makes its opinion on whether to approach the Eurozone or not. Perhaps it was not said today very clearly, but to enter the Eurozone is ultimately a political question. It's not an economic question. And we could have felt that in a first part of today's discussion. However, when we started to think about the Eurozone, we really came from the economic end. So we did put on balance benefits and costs. We also tried to quantify it to the most possible scope. And as I said, overall, definitely what made big difference was exactly the level of Eurozation. Why? Because Eurozation is something what makes, in our case, foreign exchange risk as a primary risk for the overall economy of Croatia. And with the Euro introduction, overnight, this foreign exchange risk is simply eliminated, and it, of course, has another important positive spillover effects on other things like the interest rates, etc. The other thing that I wanted to note on the economic cost side, not entering into microeconomic costs, which are obviously one-off costs, and they are not significant at all in the overall calculation. But the issue of the loss of the monetary autonomy. So what I wanted to mention is that from a theoretical point of view, given the level of euroization which we have, space for pure free floating of the exchange rate policy in our case is rather limited. But beyond that, given the level of the existing financial integration, we also have very limited room for maneuver when it comes to the interest rate policy. In that sense, we really have very little to lose. And since we don't have much to lose, given our specificities, the choice of the further steps is obvious. The ECB monetary policy, not only for the euro area, but we also did analysis for us, seems to be suitable for us. We did the analysis of the optimal currency area, in particular the business cycle correlations. And what we have very clearly noticed that over the time, especially over the last 10 to 15 years, the synchronization of the cycles increased tremendously. So basically, Croatia is among those countries which is very suitable to enter the Eurozone. So this would be my final remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Faulend. Yes, I think Croatia's case is quite different concerning the euroization. A few years ago, when I was working in Zagreb, if it came to any serious business, normally the calculation was done always in euro, not necessarily in kuna. So I think that's quite an economic reality that you just described. Thank you very much. May I come to Warsaw? Madam Kightley, may I give the floor to you? Thank you.
Thank you. I will also talk about us rather than about the future of the European, of the monetary union as such. It's to some extent easier. I think what we are looking at is obviously we see clear benefits of eliminating the exchange rate risk when once adopting euro. On the other hand, so there would be growth coming from that, but we also think that joining euro would pose some problems for us. We do have reasons to believe that the ECB's policy would be pro-cyclical for us because our business cycle is the one which is least synchronized with the euro area among the CE countries. So we have, over the last 10 years, we have grown at the rate of 3% annually versus 0.5 in the Eurozone. So it is a big difference. And our inflation rate tends to be higher than the Eurozone one. So we do long-term need higher interest rates. And when it comes to the exchange, I know I talked quite a lot about the depreciation of Polish zloty, but actually when you look backwards, Polish zloty to euro, the exchange rate was actually reasonably stable apart from the shocks of the moments of the economy being hit by external shocks. And then we have a bit of depreciation now, which is helping at the moment. I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing any structural reforms or anything like that, but it is to us we see that as an advantage when a external shock comes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Kightley. As for the inflation rate, the Eurozone is catching up quite well with your inflation rate, I'm afraid. Right, let's continue, dear colleagues. May I come to Prague, to Mr. Mora? Please, Marek, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. When being asked about my expectations about the future of the common monetary policy, basically about the future of the euro area, first let me say that I would really wish the euro area to do well, because as it was very rightly said by, I think, Ľudovít, it is important for all of us. I mean, independently if we are in the Eurozone or not, if the Euro area is not doing well, we will be hit, or we will be somehow hit by this as well. So I really think that it would be good if the Euro area is doing well. But I still see, as I said before, very important underlying structural weaknesses in the Euro area, which are mainly linked to the composition of the Euro area, and this European layer or level of reforms and institutions which has been created, I think it has really not been tested by bad weather yet. And we have been told after the great financial crisis that we have all these novelties in the Euro area architecture. And once we were hit by the first crisis, which was the COVID crisis, no one spoke about the ESM and the other things. We again created something new. And now we say that this new is the medicine for the problem. But I'm not sure if next time when we get a crisis, we will use the instruments which we have, or we will create something new. So basically, for me, the current architecture of the Euro area is a big question mark. To what extent is it is resilient in the crisis? In my view, the Euro area will face a dilemma going in basically two directions. Either they will try to concentrate on reform steps at the European or Euro area level. Mainly, I think they will try really to go in the direction of a fiscal union by creating a common fiscal capacity, which could play a stabilization function at the Euro area level. But of course, this will be politically very difficult because, given the fact that we have, competitive countries and then less competitive countries, or countries which have long-term difficulties with their economic structures, then those who are more successful will see the risk that such a common fiscal capacity could end up in permanent fiscal transfers to these less successful countries, and this will be politically very difficult. But some people say that this will be a very important element to complete the architecture of the Eurozone. So I think this will one way where they will try to go, but I think it will be difficult. The other way where I think they should go, the member states, and let me just say that a good example of how difficult it is to go in this direction is something which was mentioned by my colleagues as well, which is the completion of the banking union, especially of the European Deposit Insurance System, the EDIS, of which we have been talking now for, 5 or 6 years. And we are still almost nowhere, because this is exactly the part of the banking union which makes us closest to the fiscal union, where there is a possibility of potential fiscal transfers. And this is, as I say, something very, very difficult to do. Or the other way to go, and this is a dilemma which the Euro area will have, I think, is to put pressure on the member states to make the pillars on which the Euro area is built stronger. But there again, it is politically very, very difficult, to reform Italy, to reform, I don't know, I don't want to name any other countries, is difficult. And especially you have to put a lot of political capital in it, and the outcome of these reforms will come much, much, much later, most likely in times when you as a prime minister or as a politician are not anymore in the office. So no one really wants to do such reforms. And I think this dilemma will be there for a long time, and let's see how it will be resolved.
Thank you very much, dear Marek. Quite relevant questions. Very relevant questions, I would say. Let me come to Budapest now. Dear Barnabás, what do you think?
Regarding the institutional setups, I don't want to repeat those steps were mentioned by the other colleagues. I more or less absolutely agree with Marek. I want to touch some other issues. So answering your question, what is the future of the common monetary policy? My answer is that it will be very challenging. And I think there are some clear factors on the table. The first factor is the inflation. In the last 2 decades, the inflation remained relatively low and stable. Not only here in Europe, it was a global phenomenon. And it's clear that nowadays we are moving into another area. So it's clear that the inflation rates increased globally, increased within the Eurozone, increased outside the Eurozone. And it's worth to look at how big differences we can see nowadays between the inflation rates within the Eurozone. So there are some countries where the inflation rate was around 5% in July within the euro area, and there are some countries where the inflation rate is still around 1%. So of course, now we don't know that the pickup in inflation is a transitory phenomenon or a more permanent one, but I'm quite interested how the ECB will react for this situation when there are more permanent differences and large differences between the inflation rates in case of the Eurozone members. So I think the inflation can be a big issue and can be a big challenge for the common monetary policy within the Eurozone. The other factor is the green revolution we can see nowadays globally, and I think it's a trend in the world of central banks that the central banks are more active in this field. So we can see that in the communication of the ECB. So I think the ECB will follow this trend. So I'm quite interested in that the green central banking will be suitable for only the big economies, or will it be suitable for the smaller ones or not? Because I think it will be a big question. And the third element is the digitalization and the developments in digital money. So I think it's a very current issue nowadays globally. So we can see that both in China and the US, the authorities are made a lot of efforts to develop a new digital solution, maybe digital money. And it's clear that the ECB also joined to this competition. I think it will be a very important field. So in the 21st century, those economies who are able to win the competition of digital money, I think it can be a big advantage on the real economic side. So I think it will be also a big challenge for the common central banking within Europe for the coming years. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Virág. I think these are quite relevant aspects that you raised, and remains to be seen how the Eurozone will address these challenges. Now, to make our frame complete, we started with Bratislava. Let's also finish with Bratislava, with the member states with most experience in the Eurozone. So I would invite Mr. Ódor to say a few words about his expectations concerning the future of the common monetary policy. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I will start where Barnabás finished, actually, that I also see these two trends extremely crucial. I mean, the digitalization and the green aspects with lot of not only possibilities but also challenges down the road. So this will be a kind of a new normal for central banking. About inflation, I'm a bit less concerned. So we fight it with a very, very low inflation in the euro area for a decade. So basically, what we would like to see is that the inflation goes back permanently closer to the target. So that would be partly good news also for us. But of course, we should be vigilant because we do not want to, create a kind of an uncontrolled inflationary environment. From a kind of a political economy perspective, I see one relatively huge challenge related to all those aspects we mentioned. That usually the European monetary policy was dealing not only with monetary policy questions, but in many cases it was the only game in town, basically, that if there was no decision at the government level, many cases the European Central Bank had to invent a new program or a new approach or something different. And then, as I mentioned before, these are a kind of a second best solutions or third best solutions. And we need first best solutions, and the first best solutions lay quite firmly in the fiscal and structural area I mentioned before. Without those, it will be quite hard to prosper in the future. And there is one additional aspect which is key, that if we are focusing too much on internal issues and aspects, we are losing the big picture on a global level. And that is partly the reason why, for example, China and the United States are much more ahead in the technological revolution, in many other aspects, that the euro area sometimes had to deal with their own problems and therefore is losing touch with the global scene. So these are definitely the challenges. What are the opportunities? The opportunities are of course the lessons we learned during the last three crises. Although the pace is extremely gradual, I think we are heading in the right direction, and hopefully we can keep our automobile on this track. And after 10 more years, we will be even more resilient. And if you organize a similar panel discussion 10 years from now, I hope that we will be able to report about further progresses, but it will not be easy. So I think the worst thing we can do is to deny that there are problems. Problems are there, and we need to find solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Odor. To meet in 10 years, I'm ready to do that, but even maybe we will have opportunities before, as I'm sure that the near future will bring quite a few developments what we don't see yet. Dear colleagues, this was my last question. If you don't have any additional comments, then let me warmly welcome all of you for having accepted our invitation and having contributed to the annual itinerant conference of the Hungarian Economic Association. Our discussion has revealed many aspects and considerations about the monetary policy options and choices in Central Europe. We have discussed the question of unity, prosperity, solidarity, convergence, crisis management, and many aspects of advantages and possible risks of the introduction of the euro. And also we discussed how we see the future of the common monetary policy. I hope it has been thought-provoking also for our audience. And if you allow me, let me say that I enjoyed very much this discussion. By this contribution, we wish every success to the annual conference of the Hungarian Economic Association. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention and goodbye.